Now, before I start this week's show, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor, Fidelity International. Now, Fidelity are one of the best known investment platforms out there, and they're also a global fund manager responsible for around £320 billion worth of investments for over 2 million clients globally. Now, I personally use Fidelity's investment platform to run my own 80/20 investment portfolio, and that's for a couple of reasons. A, because they're cost effective, and B, because they have access to ETFs, investment trusts and unit trusts. For those of you out there who are looking for ideas of where to invest your ISA allowance this season, then Fidelity offer a range of guidance and fund shortlists, and they also offer fund suggestions from their investment director Tom Stevenson, whose name you may recognise because he also writes for The Telegraph. Now, you can find out more information about Fidelity and all of those fund shortlists at fidelity.co.uk. But for now, on with this week's show.
Hello and welcome to episode 209 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, Andy. It's been a fantastic week. Because I'm really buzzing. I remember.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, because last week, well, there's two things. This week that's passed and the week that's coming. And you may remember I said it was our 9th birthday this week. So in the office, we had fun with it. We've been doing a lot of stuff around it being our birthday because it's good to look back and reflect about how far we'd come. We put some stuff on social media about the where we'd come from. A picture of me of my setup 9 years ago, which is basically the world's smallest laptop on the dining room table, which is still in the house that I live in, and then the office that we have now. So it's been really good doing that, doing some social media stuff, and actually just cracking on, but really trying to push on with some of the stuff that we want to do in the coming weeks. And of course, anybody who listens to this podcast will be enthused at the fact that Andy is now officially, by the time you listen to this, Andy's officially part of the Money to the Masses crew, aren't you, Andy?
Email me at andy@moneytothemasses.com. Yeah. I've been waiting 4 years to say that.
Yeah, so for us, this is a brilliant moment. For me in particular, I hope it is for Andy. But Andy's now working for Money to the Masses full time. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of him, hearing a lot more from him. And so going forward, get in touch with Andy as well as the rest of the team, and as well as me, of course. But it's going to mean that we can produce a lot more content, do a lot more things. And one of the things I'm banging on about at the moment is social media. We're getting so much engagement on social media. It's so much fun because it's allowing us to engage with you guys much more quickly in a much more fluid way. So there's a lot of stuff that is now appearing on the podcast is being driven by you. And in fact, let me just have a look here. I think of the 3 pieces this week, at least 2, if not... No, in fact, all 3 have been driven by interactions on social media. And that's through Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and I love that, and it's been really good. And some of the feedback we've been having has been wonderful on the podcast, in particular, people saying they're sharing it with their children. And I think what's happened, Instagram is where a lot of the love is, because I think people are just generally more positive on Instagram. I think they actually engage with what's going on there, and so we've been doing some competitions. So if you're listening to this, if you would like one of a very limited edition, i.e. there's only about half a dozen of these things, Money to the Masses mugs with our branding on, and our branding for our new MOT that's coming. Something on that in a second. If you want to get one of those, enter the competition, go on Instagram, because we're running a competition on there where you can get one, and we'll send you one. So all you hardcore listeners out there, some of you I've even met, go on Instagram and follow the rules on there, and you could be in the chance of winning a branded mug. Just what you've always wanted. On the Money MOT, funny enough, I'd mention that because last week I was saying it's going to launch, and with everything in the tech world, the gremlins get in, and we didn't launch this week with it. And that's because there's a couple of things we wanted to tweak. It actually exists online, and I know 1 or 2 of you out there have cunningly found it because you've used it, because it exists, and it therefore, if you go looking for it, you will find it. But there's a couple of things that we want to just tighten up to make it perfection. You know what it's like. You ask a coder to do something, you notice there's something they haven't quite done. People who use it won't notice, but I notice. So that will probably be this week. That will go out there, and we'll talk a lot more about it, and it'll be fantastic.
Did you know, Damien, that I was one of those people that did it this week?
Were you? No, I didn't know that.
Yes. I was, yes. I went and found it midweek and did my own money MOT. But as Damien says, wait for the official launch where all those tiny little bugs get ironed out. Not even bugs, but the little imperfections that Damien wants to get right.
Well, I'll give you one of them. When you go through, it's just the final message you get. I wanted it worded in a certain way, and it was important. So it is fantastic. What did you think of it, Andy? Just get people excited. I feel like I'm leading you there, but
no, genuinely, it is awesome. You put in just very few bits of information and details about your overall financial sort of well-being and health, and it just does its thing. It tells you where you're good, where you're not, and where to improve, and even asks you how often you want to be reminded and how you want to be reminded, and if you don't want the help to get things sorted. It's like having your own personal little friend, just giving you that, holding your hand and making sure that you do.
It's like having a little Damien in a box. Yeah. So it's like having this little reminder. So we're going to have more on that. One of the things I want to just quickly mention, we've had some fantastic feedback on 80/20 Investor as well, and that isn't necessarily publicly viewable because some of that happens in the forums that are within 80/20 Investor. And I just mention it because there was a chap who wrote on there about how the journey in 80/20 Investor had changed the way he invests and how the success he'd had. But what was also interesting, it had led him to do things and explore areas that aren't necessarily covered by an 80/20 Investor. And that is one of the aims of the product. It was always to try and teach people how to fish so they can go off and in time do and explore other things and go for bigger fish and whatever have you. And that's music to my ears because it's about enabling people to grow in that journey of investing. So that really made my day. So please do keep sending your feedback on social media and everything, because it's a validation that what we're seeing now is lots of people are thinking, what is this podcast? What is this website? And people are starting to be attracted because of you guys out there who are now interacting online with us much more in a visible way. So please carry on. Before we jump into what's on this week's podcast, there was a really good question on Instagram following up on last week's podcast, which I want to mention. We talked about account switching, and Sarah had done various bits of current account switching to make some free money. And somebody asked the intelligent question, does it impact your credit rating? And the answer is it can do, because when you go and apply for a new account, the bank will do a credit check on you. And so it isn't going to be something that will damage your credit rating like missing a credit card payment. But you have to be aware that there will be a check that will appear on your credit record. So if you were about to go for a loan, then you would sensibly not want to be going and opening a dozen accounts with different banks, because it may start to suggest, especially if they've got any credit associated with them, then it may slightly hinder your chances of getting a loan or credit. So I thought that was, I forgot the gentleman who asked the question on social media. I would have mentioned his name, but it's late, it's Friday, and I forgot to look it up.
So, what have we got coming up? You mentioned there was 3 pieces we're going to cover, all led largely by the interaction you've had on social media. What have we got on this week's pod?
The first piece is about ISAs. It's a bit of a FAQ about stocks and shares ISAs, because when people are talking online, they're asking some really sensible questions. And some of them are, how do ISAs work? What is an ISA? Going a little bit more back to basics and some of the nuances, because there's different types of ISAs and you have to realise that not everybody knows the difference. So I want to run through that. The next piece will be around investment advice for somebody who's perhaps a school leaver or starting their first job who want to get into investing. Any words of wisdom I have for them. And then at the other end of the scale, somebody asked me question regarding, if you take the 25% tax-free cash from your pension, what is the most tax efficient way to withdraw an income from that pension pot? And so I'm going to talk about that as well.
Great, so we're going to start with ISAs.
Let's do ISAs, because it will link into the question regarding what should somebody who's young start to do with their money. So ISAs, individual savings accounts, that's what the ISA stands for, and what they really are is just a box. So if you imagine a box, you put things in, and that will be investments or cash, and when things go in that box, they are protected from the taxman effectively. So any gains you have, they tax free. Any income that's produced, that is tax-free. So in itself, it's not really anything. It's a box. So it really matters what you put in the box as to what returns you will get and whether it'll be any use to you in the future, whether you can use it to buy a house or whatever it is you want to do. Now, there are slightly different versions of that box. There's a stocks and shares ISA, there's a cash ISA, there's a lifetime ISA, there's a help to buy ISA, there's an innovative finance ISA, and there's a junior ISA. And everybody will sit there, and if you don't know what those individual different things are, you'll be glazing over and thinking, righto, which one do I need? And this is what we're going to talk about today. So let me start with that box, just an ISA in general. How much can you put in that box? There is a limit. So every year you can put £20,000. That's the current limit. It often gets revised. £20,000 into that box in a given year. And when you put that money in that box, it can go into what is known as a cash ISA, or you could put it in a stocks and shares ISA. We'll deal with those two first. They're probably the easiest to deal with. A cash ISA is very simple. The money goes into effectively like a savings account, and you'll get an interest rate. And that interest rate at the moment won't be particularly good because rates are so low, and the money will grow. Every year you can put in another 20,000 if you want to. You don't have to put in the full 20,000. You could put in a fiver if you wanted. But what happens if you don't use the allowance each year? You lose it. There's no rollover. So that's why people get towards the tax year end. It will happen again this year, as it does every year. There'll suddenly be a flurry of activity, and people will start opening ISAs or topping up their ISAs because they suddenly realised if they don't do it, then they're going to lose that allowance. And the reason why people want to keep filling up their ISA allowance each year, let's just imagine that these ISAs never ever grew in value. So you put £20,000 in there, and you put a £20,000 in the next year and the next year. You can see how that pot suddenly becomes bigger. Of course, I know not everybody has £20,000, but if you were basically filling this box up with stuff, that box is tax-free. So you can imagine that once that pot becomes sizable throughout your lifetime when you're putting money into it, you can use that money without the taxman taking any more from it. Now, you don't get any tax release on the way in like you do with pensions, but the box, the taxman can't get in there. Now imagine if that box and the investments, the cash or whatever's in there are growing and you're getting a return on it. You can suddenly see that very quickly you could get a very sizable return and you could get a very sizable pot. Now, ISAs have been around since about the year 2000. And there are some people who've been using their ISA allowances who have more than £1 million in them because of the growth and the amount that they've been putting in. Now, if you imagine that you've grown this pot with investment returns and income that's all going into the box, you can effectively have £1 million that the taxman is looking at you as you take the money out each year and you live off it one day, that he can't take any tax from that. That's attractive. So over time, what people tend to do, if they have investments elsewhere, they may try to move money into that ISA just to keep topping it up. So we've got cash ISAs, which are cash. We've got stocks and shares ISAs. So they're normally things that are provided by the likes of Hargreaves Lansdown, Fidelity, Interactive Investor. What they are a box you can go and put funds in. You could put investment trusts in. You could put ETFs in, individual shares. So there's a whole range of things you can do, and that's where the DIY investors get involved, and that's the area where 80/20 Investor comes into its own. It helps you choose what type of things you might want to put in that box to make it grow bigger and bigger. Now, there are other types of ISA, as I mentioned. There's the lifetime ISA and the help to buy ISA. Now, these ISAs were created to encourage people or to help first-time buyers get on the property ladder, to help them save up a deposit. So there are very strict rules around who can use them, how they work, because at their core, what they do is you put money in there and the government gives you a nice Brucey bonus to try and top it up to help you get on that property ladder, because obviously house prices are getting more and more expensive, and they're very conscious that first time buyers aren't able to get on the ladder. So they were trying to do various different initiatives to try and encourage people to start saving into ISAs. Now, help to buy ISAs, there's all the rumours about them being replaced, and it's likely that they will do by lifetime ISAs sort of be superseded. Now, the rules on them, I'll quickly flit through them, but you can go on Money to the Masses and Google Help to Buy ISA or Lifetime ISAs, and you can find what the rules are. But Help to Buy ISA was the precursor to what is the lifetime ISA. And the way they work is that you could only put in £1,200 initially into the ISA, and then you could put in a regular amount of £200 a month every month, and that would grow. But what they would do is when you went to buy your house, they would give you a 25% Brucey bonus. So that was attractive, and there was a maximum amount of 3k that they would do that. The problem came where there were some people who used that vehicle and then went to buy their house. They didn't realise they didn't actually get that bonus until the house had actually gone through. So they were hoping to use some of that bonus in to pay the conveyancing fees, etc. So Help to Buy, what you really have to focus on, there was a slight limit to how much you could put in. It was more about regularly putting money in to sort of encourage regular saving. The other thing is that it worked as a cash ISA, so it was only cash. You couldn't have a Help to Buy and a cash ISA in the same tax year. It was really cash. So what we then went on to, like I say, look at the site for the full rules on the Help to Buy ISA. But what we then went on to was something that was a little bit more flexible, and that's the lifetime ISA. And the idea was you could put 4k a year into that ISA, and you would get a 25% bonus that would be paid regularly to the pot. So you didn't just have to wait until a certain time. Well, what it meant is if you put 4k a year into it, you'd get an extra £1,000. It'd be topped up towards £5,000. That's a nice bonus. There are rules. Again, you could only be aimed at first-time buyers. You had to be between 18 and 40 to get it. The bonus would only be paid until you're 50. This all sounds very convoluted, and that's because it is. And the other thing is that you didn't have to use it to buy a house. You could decide instead to use it to fund your retirement. So if you got to age 60, you're allowed to then start taking money out of it. If you did anything else and withdrew money from it in the interim, didn't buy a house, for example, and you decided when you're in your 40s to start taking money out, you would have got hit with a 25% tax charge. It was kind of the idea, the logic that you were taking back the bonus they'd already given you. But because of the way the maths works, it actually means you get penalised almost more. And that was a neat idea. I think for some people it was a little bit confusing. But if you're saving for a house, there's definitely the attraction there with a lifetime ISA because you're getting this bonus on top. The other thing is you can invest within it, so it works a bit more like a stocks and shares ISA. So you could try and go for broke and try and grow your portfolio. It didn't have to just be in cash. So there are cash lifetime ISAs out there, and there are stocks and shares lifetime ISAs out there. The issue was there weren't many providers who actually entered the market. There was a lot of fanfare about it, but not many companies got that excited about producing them. So lifetime ISAs have their place. So if we go back over them, cash ISAs are great for people who are risk averse. Stocks and shares are great for people who want to try and grow their funds over time. It could supplement a pension, for example, or they may not want to pay into a pension and may decide for a period of time to actually have the flexibility because they could dip in and out. You can't with a pension. They might decide to invest in a stocks and shares ISA. And don't forget, it is possible that you could decide one day, if you had enough earnings and so therefore could get the tax relief, to decide to take some money out of that ISA and put it into a pension and get the contribution. But you'd have to earn enough money to get not the contribution, get the tax relief. You have to earn enough money to get the tax relief. So there's always that sort of flexibility. That's why pensions versus ISA, there's no definitive winner. We then go on to the innovative finance ISA. And now what this was is an idea that was trying to get peer-to-peer lending. So you know the peer-to-peer lending that goes on out there where you, rather than have the middleman like a bank where you would put your money in a savings account, they would take that money and they would then lend it via mortgages or loans to other people, and then they would charge them more interest than they pay you as a saver, and they would take a cut. That middleman was taken out by peer-to-peer lending. They were trying to be conduits to link you up with people who wanted to borrow money. So you would deposit, they would lend the money out, and they would divvy it up. They wouldn't just be to one person, and that could be to businesses or individuals. And the idea is that you get more interest because there is no middleman. What the peer-to-peer or the innovative finance ISA was designed to do was allow this kind of new world, this new innovative idea to be put inside an ISA and people access it. There was a demand for it. So that is great. It might interest some people. There are companies like RateSetter who do them, so go and have a look. They have some attractive offers. I mean, my issue with it is just because it's regulated and inside an ISA, it still isn't covered under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which means if they go bust, then your money, you're at the whim of whatever happens to that company. But lots of these companies, like RateSetter, do have a ring fencing going on and a protection fund. So you can read more about that. But the idea is they're trying to create their own version of a protection scheme, but it is theirs, it's not the government scheme. So that might be for somebody who just wants to do something different, I'm talking about the innovative ISA, that might be for somebody who wants to do something different, who wants to try peer-to-peer, who maybe already has peer-to-peer, but just wants to be able to pay less tax on the returns that they're getting. And of course we then get to the point where you get junior ISAs, and our junior ISAs are fairly straightforward. They're ISAs for kids, so people can put money into them. You can put £4,260 in there in a year, and the money grows in much the same way as a normal ISA, tax-free on capital gains and income. But the child does get control of it at age 16, and they do gain full access to it at age 18. So you have to, if you're going to use one, you're obviously going to have to hope that your darling child isn't going to turn into the next horror, that you don't want them to have the money. So they have their place, they're very tax efficient. You get cash versions and you get stocks and shares ISA versions, and we have whole posts on Money to the Masses about the different ones out there. Now, there were the ISAs, the different types. A couple of quick points I just want to mention. People often think, well, what happens if I put money in an ISA? Can I get it back out? And then can I put it back in? It doesn't work like a bank account. Okay, it's not like you can put money in and out regularly. What happened a couple of years ago, the government changed the rules and allowed something called flexible ISAs. It isn't a different type of ISA as such. What it means, it gave companies the ability to be more flexible with their ISA allowance. So to recognise that, say you put £20,000 in, your boiler blew up, my favourite example, the boiler blowing up, and you had to take £5,000 out. As long as you did that in the same tax year and you went down to £15,000, you could put the £5,000 back in again to take you back up to the £20,000 limit once you got the money again. And that was what was flexible. Previously, what would happen is if you took out that £5,000, it's tough. It's about the amount of money you had put in. You couldn't top it back up again. They'd go, well, no, you put 20 grand in a few months ago. Yeah, the fact you took out 5, that's irrelevant. You did put in 20, that's it, you're done. The problem is not everybody, it's not compulsory, this flexibility. So some providers are flexible, some providers aren't flexible. The last time I checked, Hargreaves Lansdown, for example, didn't operate a flexible ISA structure. So theirs was still on the old rules. For a lot of people, it doesn't really make much difference because they don't take money in and out on a regular basis or anything like that. But it's something to bear in mind and something to double check if you go and open an ISA with somebody. But like, as I say, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. It's just something to be aware of. Other quick questions I'll go on to. Can you switch ISAs? Yes, you can. You can move money between ISA accounts. One thing I would say is that don't cash in an ISA and then move it across to somebody else's cash separately, because if you pull it out of that box and put it into another box, so let's just say, for example, your box was with Hargreaves Lansdown and you wanted to take what's in that box and put it over with somebody like Interactive Investor, the issue you'd have, as soon as you took it out of that box, it's no longer in the box. It's not in an ISA. And therefore, when you went over to the new place and went to give it to them, they'd take it as a new contribution for that tax year. You've lost the previous tax advantage. So you've emptied the box. What you need to do is what they call in specie transfers, if possible, or you just turn it into cash, for example, within that ISA. So let's say you had a particular fund with Hargreaves Lansdown. An Interactive Investor might have the same fund. You could just go to them, I want to do an in-specie transfer. The money stays in that fund and it just goes across to them and nothing's changed. You've not been out of the market. So it's like you've got the box, you hand it to Interactive Investor and said, right, now you look after it. If they don't have the same fund, you could just say, right, can you turn my money into cash within the box still, within the ISA, and then still hand that over. So what you want to make sure is if you ever transfer, you either do it in specie, if you can, it will take longer, or if you do turn the fund into cash, make sure it doesn't come out of the ISA structure. One last thing I wanted to mention, stocks and shares ISAs. I did say that there's it's like having a box and you decide what you want to put in it. Something like 80/20 Investor can help you. You might go to a fund supermarket like some of the ones I've mentioned, and there are thousands of funds you could pick off, shares to put it in your box. The advent of robo-advisors means that you actually just pick it off the shelf. It's like a product. It's already full up. And you just go and they have a portfolio. That's what the likes of Nutmeg do, what Money Farm do, what Wealth Simple do. So you go there and they do a questionnaire and they go, right, there you go, Andy. Box number 5 for you. That, I reckon's about right. And it is the same box that everybody gets. You can't change what's in there. The ISA is the ISA. If you want to get rid of it, you can obviously cash it in, or you can change for a different box with them, if that makes sense. So it's a very off-the-shelf type format, and that's why they've grown in popularity, because this is why it links quite nicely to with a question I'm going to come on to in a second, is that for people who are new to investing, they quite like the idea of, do you know what, I want a stocks and shares ISA. I want the possibility of greater upside. Yes, I know there could be some downside if markets fall, but I don't know what to pick. Do you know what? I just want something that's cheap and that has got a diversified bunch of things in there. And that's where the robos come in, and that's why they've been so popular.
Excellent stuff. Good insight there. And you already alluded to the fact that this sort of links nicely into the second piece you're going to cover, and that's investment advice for someone fairly new to investing, like a school leaver or someone who's maybe got smaller amounts to invest at, where to start.
Yeah, one of the things is, if you've got a new job and you are deciding you want to invest, one of the things I would say is, obviously, first things first, auto-enrolment. That is pension related, but you will likely be entitled to be enrolled into the pension scheme at your work. It's, in a way, you have to pay in, but there's free money coming from your employer, so tick that box. I think that's almost a no-brainer. If you've got money to spare and you decide you want to invest, then ISAs, again, what we just talked about. So you would either go for a cash ISA, or you may go for a stocks and shares ISA. If you were going for, you're saving for your house, you might go and look at something like a Help to Buy or a Lifetime ISA, because that's what they're designed for. They're designed for people who are looking to buy their first house. If you are looking just to grow a pot that you might want to access one day for something other than a house, then, as I say, stocks and shares ISAs are where you probably you want to be, or a cash ISA. Now, what do you do? Where do you go? The one thing you've got if you're young is you've got time. And by that I mean you're likely to not need access to it for quite some time. And if that's the case, because you're not, say, 55, trying to invest to supplement a pension or something, if your time horizon is longer, so you're just sitting there thinking, I just want to put money away for a rainy day, and it's not within the next 5 years, then investing is for you. So you might go and have a look at something like one of the robo-advisors I mentioned. What's great about it is that you have the time for your portfolio to recover should the market tumble, because you're only young. And so for me, I'm only talking from my own experience, what I would do if I was going to start investing, I would take more risk than I would do at my age now, because I can. I've got greater time for markets to recover. And also the reason I would do that personally, and I'm not telling people to be reckless, you obviously have your own risk profiles, and you can find out what your risk profile is by going to a couple of the robo-advisors and filling their questionnaire, even if you don't go with them. The reason I would take more risk is because when you're only putting in small amounts, it's almost, there's a strange dynamic between the return and the fund size you've got. So by that I mean that when your funds is small, then making a steady return on it is going to make little difference. It's not going to really grow. Always think in extremes. If you had £1 in an ISA, even if you made 100%, you're going to end up with £2. You're not going to be rich doing that. Difference is, if you had 100 grand in an ISA and it went up 100%, you'd have 200 grand. You can see it's a difference. So the bigger your pot, the more it's about the return you get. The smaller your pot, the more it's about how much you put in. Because in order to grow your pot, to get it bigger, when you're starting out, it's about how much you put in. That has the biggest impact on it growing. And the reason I said about taking more risk is, I've got the time for markets to recover. I've got a longer time horizon if I don't need it for a number of years. It also means that I've got a more chance of my pot growing, because, I use an extreme example. You're not looking at morning are probably about 5 to 7% on average a year from equity markets. If you were going to pick something like a UK fund, then you're going to want to probably take a bit more risk to have more upside potential. You will have more downside potential, but you're going to get more upside potential. So for me, my advice is for my younger self would be, put as much in as I can. Try and increase my contributions regularly. So start small. If you could afford £20 a month, then after a period of time, just automate it so it's going in anyway. You're paying yourself first, they call it. So that goes out, you don't even notice it. Then every now and then you increase that direct debit or that standing order to put it up a bit. That will start to, before you know it, you'll get used to the idea that this money's just disappearing, how much you've got net. I would then look to be, for me, I would take more risk. That's just because that's the type of person I am, and to try and grow the fund because I've got a long time horizon. And I'd keep costs low because you've got a huge time to compound your returns. If you're going to have this pot for, say, 30 years, maybe, keeping costs low would have a huge impact on your performance. So I would look at something that was cheap. I would go with something that potentially like a Vanguard or something like that, which they've got a whole range of cheap trackers. And the thing is, you could start off by just using a tracker and a passive fund or a robo-advisor and starting to learn a bit more about investing and getting engaged with it. Because if you just try and pick and buy funds from the word go, you might struggle, you might pick the wrong thing, and then you sort of learn the hard way. But if you pick a tracker, you start to understand why your fund is performing the way it does, you'll probably gain confidence and start to try and work out, okay, I'm going to try and see if I can do better than Nutmeg are doing, or better than Money Farm are doing, or better than Vanguard are doing. So my advice would be regularly invest, increase the contributions as much as you can, take risk, and keep costs low. And I think that would be a good starting point. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers in the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Alright, so on the last piece then, Damien, we're going to cover that 25% tax-free drawdown at the when it comes to that lovely time of retirement and you think, what am I going to do with my cash? You've had a question about that, and what's the best way to do it in the most tax-efficient way in order to draw down an income, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just answer this question fairly directly. I'm not going to dwell on all the different things they could do with their money and various bits and pieces down that way. But if they're looking just at the tax idea, what happens if you've got a pension that's got 25% that's tax-free and the rest that isn't, then what happens is if you start to take your pension, let's say you take the whole lot in one go, then 25% of it's tax-free, the other 75% ends up being taxed at your marginal tax rate. So it kind of gets treated as a big lump of income on top of your yearly earnings. So you can see you could get absolutely clobbered for tax by doing that. So the first answer is, if you're going to access a pension, you would be sitting there thinking, well, how do I minimise my tax? Well, one way is to not draw too much at any one point, because the more you draw, the bigger the tax bill will end up being. One thing you could do, and I know people who've done this, by the way, that they have been high rate taxpayers in life. Oh, sorry, I say in life, it makes it sound like I'm going to die. In their working life, I should say. Yeah. And they've enjoyed the tax relief at, say, 40% when they've been paying in. But then when they retire, they set up their finances so they don't have much income coming in from any other sources, and then they're able to draw an income that is almost tax-free because they keep it below their personal allowance, or which is around about £11,000 at the moment. So you can see they've got the tax relief, but they've not paid any tax on the income, because don't forget, like I said, pension income is taxable, and that is one way of doing it. You could try and reduce your own income tax liability from your other sources, and for some people that may mean, if they've got a husband or wife, that if there's another income producing asset they have, they may put it in their name, and yes, they may lose control over that asset legally, but is a way to mean that the income is assessed on them rather than you. So the people who do this, I've seen it, and they will try and make sure they can mitigate their other income, so when they start drawing from their pension, they pay less tax on it. Now, it goes back to that other thing of the ISA, that you can see why people now try and get stuff in ISAs, because it means that they don't have to pay tax if they draw on that, so they don't have to draw so much from their pension. They can end up having some from their pension tax-free and take stuff from their ISAs tax-free. I have to say, it's the way rich people work. That's what they do. So I suppose in a way you could try and mirror some of that. In answer to this question, what is interesting is the most tax efficient way is probably not to do what the gentleman suggested, because you don't have to take that 25% tax-free cash as one lump sum. It's the common thing that people do, and it may be they do it to pay off a mortgage, but some people just take that 25% lump and go, it's tax-free, I'm having it, and putting it in the bank. Well, all that's done is probably end up being taxed, because they earn interest on it, and it may be taxable, or it end up being part of their estate, which will get taxed on inheritance tax if they die. But they then start drawing an income from their pension, which is therefore liable to tax, and the amount of tax obviously will depend on their wider tax position. What you could do instead is draw a combination of tax-free cash and income when you take your withdrawals, and so you can actually pay less tax on your income or your withdrawals from your pension if sometimes you don't take all the tax-free cash up front, especially if you're going to do it and you're going to just leave it in the bank. What's the point in doing that? So the other thing to do is, don't forget, you can spread the withdrawals over different years, because if you do that, then you can each year your tax position will effectively reset. And the other thing just to mention, if you didn't take all your tax-free cash up front, then it remains in your pension pot, and of course your pension pot is growing, hopefully, if you're investing it, and so therefore in pounds and pence the amount of tax-free cash you've got in your pension is growing along with the rest of your pension. So therefore you actually could get a larger sum in terms of pounds and pence tax-free out of your pension in the long term if you actually leave some of it invested. So it's a strange one, because the answer is not to do what the question actually suggested. So I hope I've made that clear. There we go, Andy. I'm done.
Excellent stuff. Well, I feel like we covered quite a lot of topics in quite a lot of detail this week. I think listeners got a bit of value for money there. I say value for money. These are obviously free.
But people love them, Andy. They are telling us they like them. And one chap told on the Instagram this week, said that he makes his children listen to them. So brilliant. Just as well we don't swear.
Wow, inspiring the next generation. If you want to get in touch with Damien, then please do so. Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Of course, Instagram is where it seems to be happening at the moment. Head over to Instagram, search for Money to the Masses, and there'll be lots of stuff on there. Again, Damien mentions at the start of the podcast there's a competition going on. You can get your hands on a fantastic mug, and you can read all about the Money MOT and stuff like that over on Instagram. Of course, Twitter's always there too. And yeah, I'm at Money to the Masses now, so get in touch with me too if you like. Andy at moneytothemasses.com.
Yeah,
Damien, we're done.
We're done. Feel free to send Andy a welcome email. That'll make his day when he sits down at his desk.
That would be really nice, actually.
Yeah, when you sit down on Monday and you've got your desk and you have one or two welcome emails, that'd be quite nice.
Yeah, that would be absolutely lovely. Having my first sup of coffee in your office and...
In our office, Andy. It's not my office, it's our office. Come on, you're on board. Right, yeah. That's it for this week, Andy. Until next time.
Till next time.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.